I want to start from the actual beginning, which was not the infected people or the military checkpoints or the news going dark. The actual beginning was a Tuesday morning when 3 traffic sensors on I-78 westbound started sending impossible data. That's it. That's the seed of everything. I've been with Region 4 DOT for 9 years. Before that, I was in grad school studying transportation engineering at State. Before that, I was watching my father drive away in a Ford pickup when I was 12, and somehow deciding that systems, structured, logical, predictable systems, were more reliable than people. That's probably more than you need to know. But I'm writing this as honestly as I can because I think honesty is the only thing that matters now. So, 3 sensors on I-78 westbound. I was at my desk in the DOT Operations Center on a Tuesday morning, with a coffee that had gone cold because I kept forgetting to drink it. That's a habit Doug from Dispatch has been giving me grief about for 3 years. He buys me an insulated mug every Christmas, and I keep leaving it in my car. The Operations Center is a room the size of a school gym, filled with monitors showing live traffic feeds, sensor data, incident reports, weather overlays, and about 14 different data streams that most people find overwhelming, but that I find, honestly, calming. There are 72 cameras I can access from my workstation, 16 dynamic message signs that I can update remotely, 143 loop detectors embedded in the pavement across the region, each one pinging vehicle counts every 30 seconds. I know this system the way some people know their childhood neighborhood. I know which sensors run hot in summer rain and need recalibration. I know which camera on the Route 9 interchange has a loose housing that makes it tilt 3 degrees east in high wind. I know which stretch of the elevated expressway develops standing water at the 4.2-mile marker after more than half an inch of rain in under 2 hours. I know this system, which is why when 3 sensors on I-78 westbound started returning 0 counts at 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, I knew it wasn't a sensor failure. 0 counts means no vehicles detected. On a Tuesday morning at 8:47 a.m. on I-78 westbound, you should be reading between 1,800 and 2,400 vehicles per hour at that loop detector station. The morning commute peaks between 7:45 and 9:15. 0 counts at that time of day meant either all 3 sensors in that cluster had simultaneously failed, which doesn't happen, and if it did, there'd be a power anomaly in the log. Or, there were genuinely no vehicles passing over those detectors. I checked the power log. Normal. I pulled the camera feed for that stretch. The image was grainy because it was overcast, but I could see the roadway clearly enough. The westbound lanes were empty, not light traffic empty, completely empty. 8-lane interstate highway, with no vehicles on it, at rush hour on a Tuesday. I sat there looking at that feed for probably 40 seconds, which is a long time to just stare at a monitor when you have 72 other feeds to cycle through. Then I pulled the upstream camera at the previous interchange. Traffic was backed up to that interchange. Badly. I could see the tail end of it. Hundreds of vehicles stopped, emergency flashers on some of them, a couple of cars that looked like they'd pulled partially onto the shoulder. Something had stopped traffic from passing through. I went to the incident log. No accident reported. No maintenance closure filed. No weather event. I checked the dynamic message sign upstream of the backup. It was blank. Nobody had pushed a message to it. I called Pete in field ops. "Hey," I said. I-78 westbound around mile marker 34. You got anything? "Nothing in my queue," Pete said. He sounded like he was eating something. "Why?" "I've got complete stoppage on the westbound lanes past the 34-mile marker. No incident report, no closure. Cameras upstream show major backup developing." "Huh." A pause. I heard him chewing. "Want me to dispatch a unit?" "Yeah, and check if there's anything with MATA. Maybe they have a maintenance closure that didn't get entered." "Sure." I logged the anomaly at 8:51 a.m. and went back to watching the feeds. By 9:10 a.m., the backup on I-78 westbound had extended past the previous interchange. I could no longer see the tail of it on camera because it had grown beyond my camera coverage in that area. I'm estimating, based on queue-length algorithms I ran in my head while watching, that it had grown to roughly 4 miles of stopped vehicles in about 20 minutes. That's fast even for a major incident. Pete called back at 9:22. Okay, so I sent a unit out and he's not responding. Not responding? Radio checked out fine before he left. He went out on Route 9 to approach from the north side of the interchange. I haven't heard from him since he got within about a mile of the area. I looked at the camera covering the Route 9 approach. The image showed an empty road. Then, in the far background of the shot, maybe half a mile distant, something I couldn't quite resolve at that resolution, vehicles stopped sideways across the roadway. Pete, I said. Yeah. There are vehicles blocking the Route 9 approach. A pause. I see it. Hold on. I'm getting something on another channel. His voice changed slightly. Got quieter. The way it does when he's doing two things at once. Declan, I'm getting a report from... Okay, this is weird. I'm getting an emergency closure notice, but it's coming from a state police coordination channel, not from our district. And it's flagged as hazmat. Hazmat? Yeah, chemical incident. They're saying there's been a chemical release near the interchange, and they're implementing emergency traffic control to prevent. He stopped. What? It says the notice was filed at 6:15 a.m. 6:15 a.m. 2.5 hours before the sensors started showing anomalies. Either the notice was filed in advance of the incident, which would mean someone knew about a chemical release 2.5 hours before it happened, or the timestamp on the notice was wrong. Okay, I said, because that was all I had. I'll put it in the log, Pete said. I sat there with my cold coffee and thought about that for a while. An emergency closure notice filed 2.5 hours before the incident it was supposedly responding to. There are exactly two explanations for that. One is that it was a clerical error, the wrong timestamp, someone logged it wrong. Two is that the closure wasn't a response to the incident. It was prepared in advance. I flagged the discrepancy in my notes. I didn't call anyone about it. I'm a traffic systems engineer. Hazmat incidents are handled by emergency management, not by me. My job is to update the dynamic message signs to redirect traffic, coordinate with navigation systems, and make sure the detour routes don't get overwhelmed. So that's what I did. I spent the next 3 hours doing traffic management for a chemical spill that I had no information about except a notice with a suspicious timestamp. By noon, 3 more highway segments had received emergency closure notices. By 3 p.m., it was 6. All of them on the western and southern approaches to the city. All of them filed, when I checked the timestamps carefully, between 5:45 a.m. and 6:30 a.m., before any of the incidents they were responding to. I should talk about the crash reports, because I haven't yet, and they're important. By around 11 a.m., the incident log was filling with crash reports from within the city, not on the highways, on surface streets, multiple vehicle collisions at intersections, but the descriptions were strange, not vehicles collided strange. The descriptions that field units were filing said things like, vehicle appears to have struck multiple pedestrians and then lost control, and multiple pedestrians on roadway, driver exited vehicle, situation unclear, and ambulance dispatched but unit reports inability to reach scene due to road obstruction. I saw these coming in, and I filed them the way I always file things, by incident type and location, and then I built a spatial map of them in my head, the way I always do when incidents cluster. 16 incidents in the same general area of the city over the course of 3 hours isn't normal clustering. Normal clustering happens around a single primary incident that causes secondary backups and secondary accidents. What I was looking at was distributed. Different neighborhoods, different street types, no obvious primary cause. I took a screenshot of my spatial map. I still have it. I'm looking at it now. The incidents form a ring, roughly, around a portion of the city that includes the hospital district and the area near the old industrial waterfront. I didn't know what that meant at the time. I know what it means now. Doug came to my desk around noon and stood there with his arms crossed, which is what he does when he's working himself up to say something uncomfortable. You seeing the same thing I'm seeing? He said. Probably, I said. Which thing specifically? All the crash reports coming in from around the hospital area. Yeah, something's wrong, Doug said. He's not the kind of guy who says things like that lightly. Doug is 58. He's been in traffic operations since before I was born, and his baseline is calm, bordering on indifferent. When Doug says something's wrong without offering a more specific description, it means the thing is beyond his ability to categorize. Yeah, I said again. The highway closures too, he said. 6 of them. All the exits going west and south. You noticed that? I noticed. They left the north routes open, Doug said. Just the ones going west and south. And one of the east exits. I thought about that. The north routes led to the suburbs that stretched out into farming country. The western and southern exits led to the 3 other major metro areas within reasonable driving distance. The east exits, most of them anyway, led to the coast, which was also a lot of destination options for people trying to get out. Leave the north routes open. Block everything else. If you're trying to keep people from going somewhere specific, that's what you do. Doug, I said, you think this is a containment? He was quiet for a moment. I think I'm going to take my lunch early and make some phone calls, he said. He walked away. I never saw him after that afternoon. He called in sick the next day and the day after that. And then the communication systems were more complicated. And I don't know what happened to Doug. I hope he got his family out through the north route when it was still open. The afternoon of day 1 was when I first tried to call Kelsey. I should explain who Kelsey is, because she matters more than anything else in this log. Kelsey is my younger sister. She's 29. She's a nurse, has been for 4 years, works at St. Catherine's, which is on the eastern side of the city, near the hospital district. She's better at most human things than I am. She calls me twice a week and I forget to call her back, and then I feel bad about it. And then she calls again, and we do the whole thing over. We had lunch together 6 weeks ago at that diner near her apartment, and she told me I looked tired, and I said I was fine, and she gave me the look our mother used to give, and I changed the subject. I tried calling her at 1:47 p.m. on day 1. Went to voicemail. I left a message that said, "Hey, it's me. Give me a call when you get a chance." I did not say, "I'm looking at something at work that's scaring me." I didn't say, "I think something is happening near your hospital." I said, "Give me a call when you get a chance," in the voice I use when I'm trying not to transfer anxiety to people. She didn't call back. I told myself she was working a shift. Nurses work 12 hours. She might not have her phone. I went back to my screens. By 4 p.m., the dynamic message signs on the open north routes were advising drivers to avoid downtown area, follow detour signs, which was a message template I'd seen used during flooding events and large concerts. It's a generic redirect message. I hadn't pushed it. Someone above my level had pushed it from a central coordination point I couldn't see. I tried to access the central coordination system to see who was pushing messages. My login worked fine, but the coordination dashboard showed me a locked session being operated by someone with administrative credentials I didn't recognize. The user ID was EMGMD Auto 01, which is the identifier for Automated Emergency Management Protocols. Automated. Nobody was sitting at a keyboard pushing those messages. The system was doing it by itself, running a pre-programmed emergency response routine. I have been in this job for 9 years. I have never seen the Automated Emergency Management Protocol activate without a human supervisor logging in to oversee it within the first 15 minutes. I checked the supervisor log. No one had logged in. At 4:23 p.m., I called my supervisor, a man named Greg, who I have a perfectly functional professional relationship with, and who calls me Deck, even though I've never asked him to. Greg didn't answer. I called the division director. No answer. I called the Central Coordination Center's general line and got a recorded message saying all staff were occupied with an ongoing incident response and to monitor official channels for updates. I tried Kelsey again. Voicemail. I looked at the screens. Traffic on the open north routes was thickening now, getting slow. People were leaving, not evacuating. That word wasn't anywhere yet, but leaving. The way people leave when they've decided something doesn't feel right, and they don't want to wait for official confirmation. The instinct to leave before they tell you to is a rational one. I know that now better than I ever wanted to. I stayed at my desk until 6:30 p.m. because I didn't know what else to do. I updated incident logs. I checked sensor data. I watched the highways go from congested to gridlocked to stopped on the 3 remaining open routes, as everyone who was leaving tried to leave through the same funnel. I tried to push some traffic management messages to help distribute the flow between routes, and discovered my send permissions for the dynamic message signs had been revoked. At some point during the afternoon, I'd lost the ability to push messages to the system I'd been operating for 9 years. My keycard still worked on the building doors. My login still showed my data. I just couldn't push any commands anymore. Someone had locked me out of my own system without telling me. I packed my laptop and my field kit, and I left the building. Current status update. I'm in a Department of Transportation maintenance shed on the far eastern edge of the city, maybe 5 miles from the perimeter of what I'm calling the containment zone, based on what I've seen and what I now know. The shed is concrete block, single room, used for storing road salt and equipment. There's a ventilation slot near the roofline that lets in air and light. The door is a heavy steel roll-up that I can lock from inside, with a slide bolt I scavenged from a hardware store during a supply run on day 9. I have 11 days of food left if I'm careful. Water from rain collection and a small filtration setup I built out of gravel, sand, and a series of plastic containers from the equipment bay. There's a generator in the back that runs on diesel, and I'm using it only to charge devices, never for heat or continuous power, because noise is a problem, and diesel is not infinite. I haven't seen another person in 4 days. I have seen infected people. I'll use that word, infected, because it's the most accurate descriptor. Every day. Several times a day. The ones outside the shed right now, or at least the ones I can hear moving on the gravel access road, number somewhere between 4 and 8. Hard to tell, because the sound overlaps. They don't investigate the shed with any apparent purpose. They drift past. Sometimes they stop and seem to react to sounds from farther away, and then drift in that direction. They don't try doors. They don't look in windows. They walk, and they react to sound. And if something makes a sound close to them, they go toward it. That's the pattern. It's consistent. The ones I've seen up close don't have the kind of focus in their faces that living people have. The eyes are there, but the tracking is slow, reactive, not deliberate. I'll come back to what I know about them. For now, I'm going to continue the log. Part 2. Night 1, Day 2. The city changing. I drove home on surface streets because the highways were either closed or gridlocked. The drive that normally takes 25 minutes took close to 2 hours. This was partly traffic and partly the fact that I stopped twice to watch things happening on the sides of streets that I didn't understand at the time. The first stop, I was on Carmody Street, which runs through a commercial district, stuck behind a line of cars at a red light that had been red for an unusually long time. When I looked up from checking my phone, I saw 2 police officers on the sidewalk to my right, dealing with a man who was on his hands and knees in the middle of the sidewalk. The man appeared to be moving strangely, not struggling with the officers, but not cooperative either, doing this slow, rocking motion. One officer had his hand on the man's shoulder, but wasn't forcing anything. Looked more like he didn't know what to do with him. The other officer was on his radio. The man's shirt was torn across the back. There was something on his arm, but I couldn't see clearly enough. The light changed. Traffic moved. I went with it. The second stop, about a mile later, a fender bender at an intersection, totally normal looking, 2 drivers out of their cars looking at the damage. A woman in a gray coat was standing on the opposite corner watching them. She was just standing there, arms at her sides, not on a phone, not moving. The position was wrong. The stillness was wrong. I've spent 9 years watching pedestrian behavior patterns on camera. There's a particular quality to how people stand when they're waiting for something. Weight shifting, head turning, body language that faces the direction they're going to go. She had none of that. She was just there, pointed at the 2 drivers. She started moving toward them, and I drove through the intersection on a gap in traffic, and I didn't stop to see what happened. I've thought about that moment a lot. I got home at 8:45 p.m. My apartment is on the 4th floor of a building in a mid-density neighborhood. Medium income area, mostly working adults and young families. Close enough to downtown to be convenient, but far enough to have reasonable parking and actual trees on the street. I'd lived there for 6 years. I knew the woman below me had a dog that barked at 6 a.m., and I knew the couple next door sometimes argued about money through the wall, and I knew which step on the stairs creaked, and that the elevator was reliable, except after heavy rain. I made food. Pasta. Because it was Tuesday, and Tuesday is when I make pasta. I have a rotation, and I find the predictability useful. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, and I started going through everything I'd seen during the day, organizing it the way I organize data, looking for the pattern underneath. Emergency closures time-stamped before the incidents they responded to. Crash reports clustering around the hospital district. Loss of send permissions. Automated emergency management running without human oversight. 2 strange pedestrian sightings on the drive home. I was building a picture. I wasn't ready yet to call it what it was. I tried Kelsey 4 more times between 9 p.m. and midnight. I got voicemail every time. I started going through the St. Catherine's Hospital website looking for a general contact number. Found one. Called it. Got a recording saying the hospital was operating at increased capacity and asking non-emergency callers to contact their primary care provider. Increased capacity. I went to sleep around 1 a.m. and I slept badly. The kind of sleep where you keep surfacing slightly and then going under again, and you're not sure which thoughts happened while you were awake and which happened in the in-between place. At one point I woke up completely because I thought I heard someone yelling outside. I went to the window. The street below was empty except for a car that was parked at an odd angle, half on the curb, and a shopping cart that had rolled out into the road from somewhere. Nothing yelling. The streetlights were on. I went back to bed and thought about the emergency closure timestamps for a long time before I fell asleep again. Day 2 started at 6:03 a.m. when my phone woke me up with an emergency alert notification. Emergency alert, hazardous material incident. Avoid the following areas. And then a list of zip codes that covered the hospital district and a roughly 2-mile radius around it. Residents in affected areas. Shelter in place until further notice. This is not a test. I sat up in bed and read it 3 times. I called Kelsey. Voicemail. I got dressed. I did this in the dark because turning on a light felt strange, and I don't know exactly why. I was wearing the same work clothes I'd worn the day before because they were on the floor next to the bed, and grabbing them was faster than finding clean ones. I had a thought, which I now recognize as the beginning of a different kind of thinking. Not traffic engineer thinking, but something older and less organized, that said I should be putting things together, things I might need. I'm going to be clear about what I knew and when I knew it. At 6:03 a.m. on day 2, I did not know there was an outbreak of infected people. I suspected something was seriously wrong. I had a collection of data points that didn't fit any normal incident type. I had a sister who wasn't answering her phone and who worked in the zone covered by the shelter-in-place order. I was scared in a specific way that I can only describe as structural fear. The same feeling I get when I'm looking at traffic flow data and I can see a catastrophic gridlock forming, but the drivers on the road can't see it yet. I packed a bag. I put in a change of clothes, my laptop, my field kit, which has a hard hat and a safety vest, and a set of master key blanks for DOT facilities, a flashlight, my Leatherman, the emergency radio from my kitchen cabinet, a USB battery bank, 3 protein bars, a half-empty box of crackers, 2 bottles of water. This is embarrassing to document. I packed like a man going on a day trip who might need a flashlight. I did not pack like a man preparing for a civilizational disruption. But that's honest, and I said I was going to be honest. I went downstairs and out to my car, and I sat in it without starting it for about 2 minutes, looking at the street. 3 cars were stopped on the street, not parked, stopped, mid-lane, doors closed, engines apparently off. I could see them from the driver's seat. One of them had a flat tire. One of them was missing its passenger side mirror. The third looked fine except for its position, blocking most of the lane. I didn't see anyone in any of them. I drove around them and went looking for Kelsey. The route to St. Catherine's Hospital crosses a section of the city that I know well from the traffic side. It passes through the warehouse district, goes up through the hospital neighborhood on a long, straight commercial street called Mercer, and ends at the complex's main parking structure where staff park. About 9 miles from my apartment, under normal conditions, 20 minutes. Under day 2 conditions, I made it 4.5 miles in about 45 minutes before the road became impassable. Impassable is maybe too strong a word for what I was looking at. Impassable suggests a wall or a flood. What it actually was, stopped vehicles completely filling every lane in both directions, and between some of the vehicles, people walking. Not walking in a purposeful way, moving between the cars slowly, aimlessly, in a way that made me think of the woman in the gray coat the evening before. And among those people were other people, alive in the normal sense, who were moving differently, faster. Some of them running, some of them leaning against vehicles with their hands on the roof, not running, just stopped, catching their breath or something else. I sat in my car and looked at this for maybe 30 seconds before I understood that driving through it was not going to happen. I put my car in reverse and backed up to a side street and parked it on the sidewalk, which felt wrong in a petty rule violation kind of way, even at that moment. And I got out and stood on the street and tried to think. My phone had signal, reduced bars. I was getting 3 out of 5, but working. I went to the city's emergency information page, and it still said hazmat incident, shelter in place. The number to call for information was busy when I tried it. I went to my email and found nothing from work except an automated IT notification about a scheduled maintenance window that had been sent the previous evening and was now comically irrelevant. I took out my DOT region map. I keep a laminated copy in my field kit, old habit, and unfolded it on the hood of my car. If Mercer was blocked and the highway routes were closed, and if the surface street grid in the hospital area was already jammed, then the logical approach vectors were either the elevated freight rail access road that ran parallel to the main commercial strip on its south side, or, and this was the one I kept coming back to, the DOT maintenance access road that runs beneath the elevated interchange. The maintenance access road is not on any public map. It's a DOT internal route, used by my field teams, to reach equipment mounted under the elevated highway structure. It's narrow, 2 vehicles wide at best, and it goes through a lot of dark, low-clearance areas under the overpass structures. But it runs from a service entrance about a mile from where I was standing all the way to within 4 blocks of St. Catherine's eastern parking lot, because that section of the elevated highway passes directly over the hospital district. I had a key card for the service entrance, the same one that still opened building doors. I looked at the road I'd come down. A couple was walking toward me from about 200 meters away. They were walking normally. A woman, a man, a child between them, who the man was carrying. They were moving at a pace that said they were trying not to run, and not entirely succeeding. The woman had a bag over each shoulder, and her head was down. "Hey," I said, when they got closer. Too loud for the silence around us. They slowed. The man looked at me with the particular expression of someone who has not yet decided whether I am a problem. "Do you know what's happening?" I said, because I didn't know what else to ask. The man and the woman looked at each other. The kid, maybe 5 years old, had his face pressed into the man's shoulder. "Attacks," the woman said. She had a faint accent I couldn't place, and her voice was very steady, in a way that I've since come to recognize as the steadiness of someone who has fully committed to getting through the next 10 minutes, and is not processing anything beyond that. People attacking each other. At the stores. There was an attack at the school. She glanced at the child. "We need to get north." "North routes are still open," I said. "Surface streets north of Mason are moving, as of last night. The highways going north are open too, but probably slow by now." The man nodded once. He'd already started moving again. "Thank you." They walked past me and kept going north. I stood there another moment, and then I went back to my car, got my bag, and started walking south toward the maintenance access road. The service entrance is a gap in a concrete barrier on the underside of the Westfield interchange, marked only by a small green DOT sign that says, "Authorized vehicles only," and a card reader on a metal post. I found it after maybe 15 minutes of walking. The streets in this area were partially empty. I could see evidence of people having moved through, discarded items, a suitcase on the sidewalk with its contents scattered, like someone had grabbed things out of it in a hurry, and left the rest. 2 vehicles that had been abandoned mid-road. but no one present at that moment. I held my keycard to the reader. The light went from red to green. The barrier swung open. Hydraulic, automatic, built to vehicle spec. I slipped through on foot and let it close behind me. Under the interchange is an odd place on a normal day. The elevated highway deck is maybe 30 feet above you, and its underside is a grid of structural beams and drainage systems, and the cables and conduit for all the traffic monitoring equipment my team maintains. There are fluorescent work lights along the access road every 40 feet or so, on motion sensors. They came on as I walked, each one triggering a moment before I reached it. It's quiet under there, or it was. The sound of the city above, the highway traffic, was usually this continuous low rush of air and tires, and that specific chord that traffic produces at speed, which I find relaxing the way other people find rain relaxing. That day, no traffic. The highway above me was closed, so the underside of the interchange was just concrete hum and the tick of the work lights switching on. I walked. I've walked sections of this maintenance road before, on equipment inspections, but never the whole length. It's about 2.5 miles from the service entrance to the far end of the access route. There are sections where the road passes under deck expansion joints, and you can see gaps above you letting in strips of daylight. There are sections where you pass cable junction boxes the size of refrigerators. There's a point about a mile in where a smaller branch road goes off to the right toward the river for what I think is a drainage infrastructure access that I've never fully explored. At around the halfway point, I found the first sign that something had already been through the maintenance road. A vehicle, a white pickup truck with city utilities on the door panel, parked at an angle against the left side barrier, driver's door hanging open. The lights were off. The engine was off. The cab was empty. There was a spill of liquid on the concrete beside the driver's door that caught the work light and looked like it might have been a dropped coffee, which is such a normal thing in such an abnormal context that I stopped walking and just stared at it for a moment. I walked around the truck. The cargo bed had tools in it, pipe wrenches, a conduit bender, a toolbox, all normal utility crew equipment. The door on the passenger side was closed. I looked in through the window. Nothing on the seat except a clipboard with a work order attached. I couldn't read it without opening the door. I tried the handle. It opened. I looked at the work order. It was for a utility cable inspection on the west side of the hospital district, dated yesterday. Assigned to a crew of 2, a name I didn't recognize and a name I did. A utility worker named Brent Calloway, who I'd met once at a joint DOT Utilities infrastructure meeting 2 years ago, and remembered as a big, cheerful man who drank terrible instant coffee from a thermos and laughed at everything. The work order was signed as in progress. Not completed, not canceled, in progress. I put it back and closed the door carefully, slowly, trying not to make sound without quite knowing why. And then I heard something that answered my question about why. From somewhere behind the truck, back in the deeper shadow under a section of deck that the work lights didn't fully reach. Sound. Not one sound. Multiple sounds. Overlapping. A shuffling. Something wet. The way rain sounds on concrete, but it wasn't raining down here. And under that, a low tone that I want to describe accurately, and can't, because it's not quite a moan, and not quite a hum. It's something in between, that I'd never heard from a human throat before. I held very still. The sounds continued, but didn't change direction. They weren't coming toward me. I picked up my pace and kept walking. I did not look back. I want to be clear. I didn't know, at that point, what I'd walked past. I suspected, my body suspected more than my brain did. I can tell that from the physical record. My hands were sweating badly enough that I kept wiping them on my pants. My breathing was short and shallow. I was walking faster than I thought I was walking. The body keeps its own data. I came out of the maintenance road through another barrier at the far end, keycarded through, and emerged onto a surface street that ran alongside the hospital complex's eastern face. St. Catherine's was in front of me, 6 stories of glass and concrete. The emergency bay on the far right. The main entrance set back behind a parking island. The parking island had 3 ambulances on it, none of them moving. One had its rear doors standing open. The emergency bay had vehicles backed up inside it that I couldn't see clearly from where I was. Every light in the building appeared to be on, every single window, and around the perimeter of the building, at intervals of maybe 30 feet along the sidewalk and into the parking structure, men and women in what I recognized as National Guard uniforms were standing. Some of them held rifles. Some of them held what looked like wooden barriers, the kind used at road closures. A number of police vehicles were mixed in, parked at angles. The hospital was surrounded, not by infected people, by military personnel. Current status update. I need to say something here that's going to disrupt the chronological format I've been maintaining, because it's something I've been processing for 18 days and I still don't have clean language for it. Kelsey is alive. I know this with a certainty that I can't fully document, because the certainty comes from a source of information I obtained on day 12, in circumstances I'll describe when I get there. She is alive, and she is inside the secondary containment zone, and she is healthy, and the reason she's being held there is not what I was afraid it was. I want you, whoever you are, reading this, to hold that fact while you read the middle sections of this log, because the middle sections are hard to read, and I know that because they were hard to live through, and writing them is its own version of that. She is alive. Okay. I stood across from the guarded hospital for a while, trying to calculate what to do. In traffic systems engineering, when you encounter an unexpected obstruction in a planned route, the protocol is identify the obstruction type, assess its permanence, evaluate alternative routes, and reroute accordingly. The obstruction was National Guard soldiers with rifles. I could not identify the obstruction type with any confidence, because I didn't understand why they were there. I could assess permanence as high, at minimum for the next several hours. I needed an alternative route to access the building. I stepped back into the shadow of the maintenance road barrier and looked at my DOT map. The hospital complex is a multi-building campus. St. Catherine's main building, a medical office building connected by a sky bridge, a physical therapy and radiology annex, a parking structure, and an older building at the back of the campus that I believe was the original 1940s hospital and is now used for administrative offices and storage. The older building had to have older access points. Buildings from the 1940s, particularly medical facilities, almost always have basement utility connections that tie into the city's underground infrastructure, steam lines, electrical conduit, and in some cases, the old pedestrian tunnel systems that connected downtown buildings before everyone drove everywhere. And I knew, from a project I'd worked on 3 years ago, when DOT was assessing underground infrastructure for a road widening study, that the tunnel system under that part of the city included a passage that ran from beneath the old hospital building northeast to a point beneath what was then a warehouse and is now a parking garage about 4 blocks from where I was standing. I didn't have detailed tunnel maps. The ones I'd seen were on a project drive at work that I couldn't access without a network connection I didn't have. But I remembered enough. The entrance to that tunnel segment was in the basement of the parking garage, behind the water main access panel. I remembered this because I'd gone in to measure the clearance for the road study, and I'd had to contort myself around a water main that came in at a surprising angle, and I'd made a note about it that I later filed and never thought about again until I was standing outside a military cordon trying to figure out how to get to my sister. The mind keeps things you don't know you're keeping. I went to find the parking garage. The parking garage was 4 stories, concrete, built in the early 1980s, based on the design. The first floor was still about a third full of parked cars, the cars of people who'd been here when things started and hadn't come back. The elevator was working. I took the stairs. The basement level was below grade, a single row of storage cages and mechanical rooms, dimly lit by emergency fluorescents that were on a battery backup system. I could smell the particular smell of old concrete and water that comes with being underground in a city. Not unpleasant, just specific. A smell that belongs to the bones of the city rather than its surface. I found the water main access panel after about 10 minutes of checking rooms. It was behind a cage that held what appeared to be leftover pool chemical supplies from whatever was here before the garage. That smell is distinct and cuts through everything else. The cage was locked with a padlock. I tried my DOT keys out of habit, even knowing they wouldn't work, and they didn't. I looked at the cage. It was a standard chain-link construction, with the familiar green powder coat of municipal infrastructure. I went back to the mechanical room and found a bolt cutter hanging from a hook between two fire extinguishers, because parking garage maintenance departments keep bolt cutters around for exactly this kind of situation, and someone had either not evacuated with the toolkit or had no use for it. I cut the lock, opened the cage, and found the water main access panel. Behind the panel, after you shifted a section of insulation lagging to the side, was a horizontal opening about 30 inches by 30 inches, barely enough to crawl through on your stomach. It dropped about 2 feet onto what I could see, with my flashlight, was a poured concrete floor. Beyond the opening, the tunnel. I sat there for a moment with my flashlight pointed into the hole and thought about what I was doing. I am not a physically courageous person. I should say that plainly. I work in an office. I do site inspections, but I have never been in a situation that required anything resembling bravery. And before the previous 24 hours, I had not genuinely believed I would ever be in one. I am the person who understands systems. I am not the person who crawls into underground tunnels alone during what is apparently some kind of catastrophic event to find my sister. I crawled into the underground tunnel alone during what was apparently some kind of catastrophic event to find my sister. It took about 20 minutes of crawling before the tunnel opened up enough to stand. When it did, I was in a corridor maybe 5 feet wide and 6.5 feet tall, with old cast iron pipes running along the left wall and an aging electrical conduit along the right. The floor was gritty. The air was stale and tasted faintly of rust and old paint. My flashlight reached about 30 feet ahead before the curve of the tunnel swallowed the beam. I walked. I checked my map obsessively, even though the tunnel wasn't on it, using my phone's compass and my memory of the street grid above to track approximately where I was. The tunnel went mostly northeast, with one pronounced left-hand curve that I estimated as taking me about 45 degrees north. Based on the distance I was walking, I was under the hospital campus grounds within about 8 minutes of the crawl section. Then I heard something in the tunnel ahead of me. Footsteps. Running footsteps, coming toward me. I turned off my flashlight. The footsteps got closer and I pressed against the wall and I realized, in the moment before the light hit me, that I'd turned off my flashlight because a running person in a dark tunnel either knows where they're going in the dark, which means they know this tunnel better than I do, or they have their own light, which means I was standing in a dark tunnel about to be discovered by whoever this was. A beam of light swept toward me from around the curve. "Who's there?" A woman's voice, steady but tight. "I can hear you breathing." I pressed harder against the wall, and then thought about it for half a second and said, "My name is Declan Marsh. I'm DOT. I'm looking for someone at the hospital. I'm not armed. I'm not infected. I'm coming from outside." A pause. "Declan." Not a question. A repetition. "Yes. Dot. Traffic systems. Region 4. Another pause. Longer. "There are scrubs people wear," the voice said. "At the hospital. Are you in?" "No. You're in work clothes. Dark gray pants. Safety vest. Flashlight in my right hand," I said. "My hands are both visible. I'm not going to shine the light at you. Can you tell me? How did you know about this tunnel?" The beam still pointed at me, but not directly, more at the floor near my feet. "Road widening study, 3 years ago. I accessed this tunnel with a facilities engineer to take measurements. I filed the report and forgot about it until today." Another pause. "That's okay. Okay." The beam lowered to the floor completely. "I'm going to turn on the overhead. Don't freak out." A switch clicked somewhere, and a string of old fluorescent fixtures along the ceiling flickered on, the kind that hum faintly and take a moment to come to full brightness. They illuminated a woman in blue scrubs. Her name tag said Claire Aldrich, RN, who was maybe 40, had a smear of something dark across her right shoulder that I wasn't going to think about, and was holding a heavy metal flashlight in both hands, in a way that suggested she was aware it could be used as a weapon. "The patients," she said, and then stopped and seemed to reassemble herself. "Who are you looking for?" "My sister, Kelsey Marsh. She's a nurse here. She works the—" "Kelsey!" Claire's expression changed, something that wasn't quite relief, but was in the vicinity of it. Your sister. She told me. She mentioned a brother who worked for DOT. She said you'd know about the tunnels. I didn't understand that for a second. Then I did. She told you that? When? This morning. Claire glanced behind her, back the way she'd come, and then looked at me again. She's okay. She's in the building. I left to try to reach. I was trying to find a way out, to contact someone outside, because we can't use our phones, and they've blocked external communications from the hospital network. The military people, the guard, they came in on Monday night, the night before last, and by Tuesday morning they'd locked the campus down. They said it was for our protection. They said there was a hazmat incident, and the hospital was going to serve as a treatment center, and all staff needed to remain on site. I looked at her, and nobody has left since. 4 nurses tried to leave through the front entrance yesterday afternoon. They were escorted back in, not roughly. No one was grabbed, no one was hurt. They were just guided back in. An officer told them it was for their safety, and the safety of others, and they'd be notified when the situation stabilized. Guided back in, I said. They're not prisoners, she said. And then, with less certainty, I don't think they're prisoners. I thought about the 6:15 a.m. timestamp on emergency closure notices filed before the incidents they responded to. What have they told you is happening outside? Chemical spill. Industrial accident near the waterfront. They said the contamination has caused neurological effects in some people, aggression, disorientation, and that it's airborne over part of the city, so everyone in the affected zone has to shelter until the air is cleared. I looked at the smear on her shoulder. She saw me looking. One of the patients, she said. Her voice was very flat. A patient who came in through emergency on Monday night. He was confused, extremely aggressive, didn't respond to pain the way you'd expect. I don't think he was well enough to be conscious, but he was moving. She stopped. It wasn't from the chemical spill, she said. I've treated chemical exposure patients. This wasn't chemical exposure. I know, I said. She looked at me for a moment. What do you know? Tell me what you know. So I told her what I knew. The timestamps, the sensor data, the spatial clustering of the early incident reports, the automated emergency management system running without oversight, the loss of my send permissions. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, with her hand on the wall of the tunnel. They knew, she said. The closure notices were filed before the incidents, I said. At minimum, they anticipated it. Before, she repeated. 6 to 8 hours before the first incidents I can document. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. I need to show you something, and I need to get your sister first, because the 3 of us need to talk. Can you get her to the tunnel? I think so. There's a basement access panel on the building's south side that I found this morning. The guard hasn't found it, or isn't watching it yet. I don't know how long that holds. How long do you need? 20 minutes? Maybe 30. She handed me her flashlight. Stay here. Keep the overheads off. I'll knock 3 times when I come back. She went back up the tunnel toward the hospital. I turned off the overheads and stood in the dark with both flashlights off, listening to the tunnel, which was quiet except for the very distant sound of traffic somewhere. But not highway traffic, just surface traffic, and not much of it, and a slow drip from one of the pipes somewhere ahead that I hadn't noticed before. 23 minutes passed. I counted in my head, rough hundreds, which I've done since I was a kid, as a way to manage waiting. My mother called it my engineer brain. She meant it as a compliment, I think. 3 knocks from ahead, then 3 more. I turned on my flashlight and went toward the sound. Kelsey looked okay. That's the first thing I want to say about seeing her. She looked okay, physically. She was in scrubs, dark blue, not the same blue as Claire, and she had a stain on her knee that I recognized from 100 childhood moments as the particular gray-brown of hospital floor, a color that gets on you and doesn't wash out the first time. Her hair was pulled back roughly. She had her work badge clipped to her collar, and she was carrying a small backpack that I knew immediately was her everyday bag, the one she always called her emergency kit, as a joke, because it had protein bars and a phone charger, and aspirin, and a spare hair tie and everything she might need for a long shift. She wasn't joking about the emergency kit anymore. She looked at me the way she looks at me when she's been scared for a while and is not going to say so. Our mother had the same look. "You're here," she said. "I found the tunnel," I said. "I hoped you would. You told Claire I'd know about it. You went on about that stupid road study for like a week," she said. "I figured if you remembered anything from that period of my life, it would be a tunnel measurement." The thing is, she's right, and she knew she was right. I don't have a response to that. I hugged her in the tunnel, which is unusual for both of us, and then we all stood there, and Claire said, "We should move. We need to talk, and we can't do it here." We moved back down the tunnel toward the parking garage, the three of us. Kelsey kept her hand on the right wall, the way I'd kept my hand on the right wall, and I thought, same trick, different people, and felt something I don't have a word for. In the parking garage basement, with the fluorescents on low, and all of us sitting on the concrete floor, which was cold through the thin fabric of their scrubs, and not that much better through my pants, Claire told me what she'd seen. She was systematic about it, which I respected. She started with Monday evening. Monday evening, 2 days ago. She'd been on a regular shift when the first unusual patients started arriving. 3 in the first hour, then 8 in the next 2 hours, then more than she was counting. All with similar presentations. Confusion, extreme agitation, apparent insensitivity to pain. The word she kept using was insensitivity. Very specific. Not that they didn't feel pain, but that they didn't respond to it the way humans respond to pain. Uncoordinated movement. Not responsive to verbal commands. Biting. Several staff were bitten before they understood what they were dealing with. "What happened to the staff who were bitten?" I asked. A pause. She and Kelsey looked at each other. 3 of them developed symptoms within a few hours, Claire said. The progression was fast. 4 to 6 hours from exposure to first symptoms. By that point, the guard was in the building, and those staff members were separated and isolated. Isolated where? 2nd floor. The unit up there is, or was, a respiratory ward. It has HEPA filtration, and the door seals are better than the rest of the building. That's where they were put. Are they? I don't know, Claire said. I haven't been up there since yesterday morning, and the guard is controlling access to that floor now. I processed that. What were the patients presenting with? The original patients? The ones who arrived Monday? We didn't know, Kelsey said. She'd been quiet until now, letting Claire do the technical account, which was right, because Claire had more detail on the clinical side. At first, we were treating it like a psychiatric emergency, like a mass psychosis event, maybe chemical-induced, because the presentations were similar to certain stimulant overdose cases we've seen. But the physical signs were wrong for that. Their temperatures were wrong, low, not high. And there was she stopped and rubbed the side of her face with her wrist, a gesture she makes when she doesn't want to say what she's about to say. The bite wound infectivity. You don't see that with overdose cases. When did the guard arrive? I said. 10 p.m. Monday, Claire said, which is approximately 4 hours after the first patients came in. They told the charge nurse it was a hazmat-related emergency response, and that the hospital was being designated a treatment facility for chemical exposure victims. And the hospital cooperated. We're a hospital. Someone from what they said was the State Emergency Management Office showed up and spoke to the administration. And the administration cooperated, yes. Did anyone ask for credentials? Authority documentation? Claire and Kelsey looked at each other again. It was 10 p.m., and we had a ward full of patients who were biting people, Kelsey said. Nobody was asking for paperwork. Fair. Okay, you said you had something to show me. Claire reached into the pocket of her scrubs and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not printer paper. The texture was different, heavier, the kind of paper that gets used for forms that need to be durable. She unfolded it and held it toward me. It was a standard-looking emergency response form. The kind I've seen versions of in my work, incident classification form, with checkboxes and fields for category codes and response authority signatures. At the top, A header I'd seen on official documents from the State Emergency Management Office. Standard logo, standard format. But in the incident classification field, instead of the generic codes I would have expected, Hazmat Alpha or Biohazard Beta or whatever, the code was Proto-7 Biocontainment/Urban. And in the response authority field, instead of a state or county emergency management signatory, the authority cited was something I'd never seen. A 3-letter designation, OCA, with a federal seal I didn't recognize. "Where did you get this?" I said. One of the guard officers dropped it. He didn't notice. I picked it up. I looked at the form for a while. Proto-7 Biocontainment/Urban. This was a pre-existing protocol, I said. They had a code for this. A pre-existing protocol with a code, Claire said, doesn't get assigned to an incident that's a surprise. No, I said, it doesn't. I was thinking about the timestamps again. The closure notices filed at 6:15 a.m. The Proto-7 protocol. The OCA authorization. The automated emergency management system that had run without human oversight, running a pre-programmed routine, as if someone had queued it in advance and it had triggered on its own. "How bad is it outside?" Kelsey asked. She asked it quietly, looking at the floor. I thought about what to tell her, and decided on all of it. The major highway exits are closed except north. The city surface street network is badly disrupted. I'd estimate it's at about 40% of normal capacity in the areas I've passed through. Less in others. I've seen infected individuals, probably 6 or 7 on the way here, in different areas. I've seen people leaving through the north route. Is the north route going to stay open? I don't know, I said. It was open 12 hours ago. What are you going to do? Claire asked. Right now, I'm going to get my sister out of this building, I said. After that, I need to think. Kelsey was quiet for a moment. I'm not going without Claire. I looked at Claire. Can you leave? Is there anything? I've been trying to leave for a day and a half, Claire said. Yes, I can leave. Okay, I said. Then we go now. The tunnel to the parking garage, then north. I have a car about a mile from here. Kelsey picked up her emergency kit backpack and stood up. Declan, she said. Yeah. The form Claire found, the OCA code. You're going to look into that, aren't you? I looked at her. One thing at a time. She gave me the look that meant she knew what I was going to do, and she didn't entirely disagree with it, and we moved. Part 3. Moving through a broken city. Getting out of the parking garage was simple. Getting back to my car was harder. The direct route was about a mile of surface streets that, in the daylight, I could now see were in a significantly different state than the night before. More abandoned vehicles. More evidence of rapid human exit. Not just discarded items, but open storefronts. Broken glass. Food on a sidewalk near a restaurant entrance that had come from overturned takeout containers. One building, a 2-story apartment block, had 2 windows on the upper floor broken, and a section of the exterior gutter torn partially away, hanging at an angle. The infected. We saw 3 of them in that mile. The first was alone, far end of the block, moving slowly along the gutter line near the curb. We stopped, pressed into the doorway of a closed pharmacy, and waited. It moved away from us, then turned a corner and was gone. We went. The second was one I almost missed, because it was stationary and partially hidden behind a parked van. I saw the feet first. The wrong angle, too flat, too still to be a person standing normally. I slowed and touched Kelsey's arm and pointed. We crossed to the far side of the street without discussion and moved past at the maximum comfortable distance. The figure didn't react to us. Its head was down. I don't know if it was sleeping, which isn't a thing they seem to do, or injured, or something else. The third was in a group of 2, coming toward us from about half a block ahead, ambling. The gait is wrong. Not quite how a person walks, but close enough that my brain kept trying to normalize it. Both of them looking in different directions. One of them was a man in a business suit, the jacket torn at the shoulder. The other was shorter, impossible to identify clearly at that distance. We went into a parking lot on our right, moved down the side of a building, came around the back, and emerged on the cross street. a full block past where they'd been. I didn't hear them following us. My car was where I'd left it, parked on the sidewalk in front of a dry cleaner that was closed and dark. All 4 tires still inflated. No visible damage. I felt a disproportionate amount of relief about this. "In," I said. The 3 of us got in, Kelsey in the passenger seat, Claire in the back. I started the engine. Quiet neighborhood. No one reacting to the sound. No infected in visible range. "Where are we going?" Claire said. Good question. I needed to answer it systematically. We needed to get out of the city. The north routes were the only option, based on what I knew at that point. But the north routes were 30 minutes of driving from where we were, assuming surface street conditions held. And I was low on gas. I hadn't filled up before leaving the previous evening, and the tank was at about a quarter, which was roughly 40 miles of range. "We need gas," I said, "and we need to get north before those routes close too." "Where do we get gas?" Kelsey said. I thought about what I knew. The major gas stations along the commercial strips were almost certainly either drained or closed. That's what happens when everyone decides to leave at the same time, and there's no resupply. The DOT maintenance depot on the east side of the district had a fuel supply, diesel, not gasoline, and I didn't know what was powering my car in terms of fuel type, but I thought it was gasoline. But the DOT maintenance depot was south of here, and I didn't want to go south. There was a city vehicle maintenance facility on the north side of the district, closer to the northern approach routes. City vehicles run on a mix of gas and diesel, depending on vehicle type. They had above-ground fuel storage tanks. I knew this from a project that had involved utility routing around the facility 2 years ago. If the facility was accessible, "There's a city maintenance yard about 2 miles north," I said. "I can get in with my DOT badge. The facilities share an access protocol. They have fuel." "Let's go," Kelsey said. I drove north. The streets were mostly clear. Occasional abandoned vehicle. One stretch where I had to ride the curb for 30 feet to get around a truck that had stopped sideways across both lanes. No infected visible from the car. We passed a residential area where I could see people on their porches, watching us drive by. Some of them with bags. Some of them on phones. 2 blocks from the maintenance yard, I came around a corner and had to brake hard. Checkpoint. 2 police cruisers across the road, lights flashing, an officer standing in front of them with his hand up. Not military, local police. He was young, maybe 25, and he looked stressed in a way that made me think he hadn't slept since Monday. I rolled down my window. "Sir, I need you to turn around," he said. He had one hand on the frame of my window and one near his belt, not quite on his gun. North routes are restricted to authorized vehicles only. "Authorized by who?" I said. He blinked. "Emergency management." "Sir, I need you to—" "I'm Dot," I said. I reached for my work ID and showed him. "Traffic Systems Engineering, Region 4. I'm conducting route assessment in response to the emergency closure order." I made this up in the 3 seconds between seeing the checkpoint and stopping, which is how certain kinds of lying work. You use the vocabulary of the situation convincingly, and the person looking at you fills in the rest. He looked at my ID. He looked at me. His eyes went to Kelsey and Claire in their scrubs. "They with you?" "Medical staff," I said. "I'm authorized to facilitate their movement to the Northern Treatment Center." There was no Northern Treatment Center. I made that up too. He looked at my ID for another long second. Then he stepped back and gestured to his colleague, who moved one of the police cruisers 6 inches to the left. The gap it created was exactly car width, barely. "Keep to the main boulevard," the officer said. "Checkpoint at Fenwick will need to see your ID again. But don't deviate from the route." "Thank you," I said, and drove through. In the back seat, Claire made a sound that was not quite a laugh. That was. "Yeah," I said. "Do you do that often?" "No," I said. "I really don't." The city maintenance yard was a compound behind a chain-link fence on an industrial street that backed up to a rail corridor. The gate was padlocked. My DOT keycard, which worked on the magnetic card readers on access gates through a shared protocol, did not work on a padlock. I sat in front of the gate for a moment. "I can try the perimeter," Claire said. Sometimes these places have a pedestrian door around the side. There was a pedestrian door around the side, but it was also locked. What wasn't locked was a rolling cargo gate at the back of the facility, which accessed the rail corridor side. The rail corridor itself was behind a different fence, but the cargo gate between the maintenance yard and the rail corridor was standing open, held open by a concrete block that someone had propped against it. I drove around the block, found the access point to the rail corridor through a gap in a fence where someone had cut the wire, recently, based on the way the cut ends were still sharp, and pulled into the maintenance yard through the cargo gate. The yard had 3 fuel dispensers under a covered structure, 2 diesel, 1 gasoline, premium, green handle. I pulled up to the gasoline dispenser. The pump handle was sitting on the concrete, disconnected from the hose, which told me someone had been here before us and had been in a hurry. I picked up the handle, examined the connection, found a standard threaded fitting, and reattached it. The pump display was dead. "There's a control panel," Claire said. She'd gotten out and was walking along the structure wall. "Here, key switch." She'd found a manual override panel, the kind that lets you operate pumps without the main system running. I found a key ring hanging inside the open side door of a small maintenance office and tried keys until one fit the switch. The pump display came on. I filled the tank completely and then filled 2 5-gallon jerry cans I found on a shelf in the maintenance office. I also found 2 DOT-issue handheld radios on a charging rack, charged, a first aid kit, a box of road flares, a folded set of road maps for the region, and in the break room refrigerator, which was still running on the facility's power, a case of bottled water, several sandwiches in plastic wrap that were still good, and 3 bags of chips. I took all of it. I also found, on a corkboard in the maintenance office, a hand-drawn map that someone had made, recent, based on the paper, and drawn in the quick functional lines of someone trying to document something fast. It showed the northern approach routes and, marked in red pen, the checkpoint locations on each one. Whoever had made this map had done the same thing I'd done in the operations center on day 1, built a spatial picture from multiple data points. Someone else in this city had been keeping track of the checkpoints, and they'd left this information on a corkboard in a city maintenance yard. I took that too. The route north was 3 miles of surface streets to reach the on-ramp that connected to the open northern highway corridor. The first mile was fine. The second mile, we hit a section where the street was simply stopped with vehicles, no through movement possible, and I had to navigate 3 consecutive side street detours that I was making up as I went, based on my mental map of the grid. At the 3rd detour, on a residential side street that I didn't know well, I saw something that stopped me. On the left side of the street, about 20 meters ahead, a child, 7, maybe 8 years old, was sitting on the front steps of a row house, alone, sitting very still, with her arms around her knees. She was looking at us. I stopped the car. Kelsey had already unbuckled her seatbelt. "Wait," I said. "She's alone out there," Kelsey said. "I know." I looked at the street. Nothing else moving. No infected in view. The girl hadn't moved. She was watching us with an expression that was mostly just waiting. Not frightened. Not reaching toward us. Just watching. "Hey," I said. I'd rolled the window down and I was still sitting behind the wheel. "You okay?" She didn't answer immediately. Then, "My mom said to stay here." "Where's your mom?" "She went to get help. She said she'd be right back." A pause. That was a long time ago. Kelsey was out of the car before I could say anything. She went to the girl with her hands visible, moving slowly, no sudden actions, the way she moves with uncertain patience. She crouched down at the girl's level. "What's your name?" Kelsey said. "Audrey." "Audrey, I'm Kelsey. Can you tell me how long ago your mom left?" I watched the street in both directions. Still nothing. The row houses on both sides were quiet. Curtains in some windows, blinds closed in others. A domestic normalcy that felt precarious, like a set that could be struck at any moment. Audrey thought about it. "Yesterday," she said. Kelsey looked at me. I looked at her. "Audrey," Kelsey said, "do you have any other family? An aunt? Uncle? Anyone else in the neighborhood?" My grandma lives on Pitcher Street, she said. That's 3 blocks. Would you like us to take you to your grandma's? She thought about it carefully, the way kids think about adult questions, checking for catches. Okay, she said. She stood up. She was wearing a backpack shaped like a turtle. She took Kelsey's hand. We drove 3 blocks to Pitcher Street. Grandma's house was there, second from the corner, and the front door opened before we reached the curb. An older woman, 60 at least, who came out onto the porch and called Audrey's name in a voice that had about 6 months of emotion compressed into 2 syllables. Audrey ran across the lawn and into her arms. The woman looked at us over Audrey's head. She didn't say thank you, which I respect, because thank you doesn't cover moments like that. She just nodded and took Audrey inside and closed the door. Okay, Claire said from the back seat, very quietly. We drove north. The checkpoint at Fenwick was manned by 2 officers who were clearly struggling. One of them was on a radio. The other was dealing with about 4 cars that had reached the checkpoint simultaneously and whose drivers were all trying to leave at the same time and getting more insistent about it by the moment. I held up my DOT badge through the window. The officer on our side barely glanced at it and waved us through. The on-ramp was ahead. I took it. The Northern Highway. Open. Traffic moving. Not normal traffic. About 30% of usual volume, but moving. People leaving. Families with cars packed full. Emergency flashers on some of them. Camping gear strapped to roofs. We merged and moved north, and for the first time in 2 days, I was driving at highway speed. Nobody talked for a while. Current status update. We drove north for about 40 minutes before I pulled off at a service plaza that was mostly abandoned. There was a fuel station with a handwritten sign on the pumps that said cash only, no change, which someone had set up with remarkable practicality in the first 24 hours of the crisis. I paid $60 in cash from my wallet and filled the tank again. Inside the service plaza building, a man named Owen was sitting behind the cashier counter with a shotgun laid on the counter in front of him, pointing at nothing in particular. He was maybe 50, wearing a plaid jacket and reading glasses, and he was eating crackers from a sleeve, with the particular deliberateness of someone who is eating because time needs to pass, not because he's hungry. How bad is it? He said. Not hostile, just asking. City's in trouble, I said. North routes are still open, but I don't know for how long. You might want to consider leaving. He looked at the store around him. This is my store, he said. I know. He offered us crackers. We took them, paid for bottled water and some food from the shelves. He charged us normal prices, which under the circumstances felt almost tender. As we left, he said, the news said it was chemical. The news is wrong, I said. He nodded, like he already knew. Yeah, he said. I figured. We ended up at a motel 12 miles north of the city, the kind of low-rise 2-story place that rents by the week and has exterior room access and a parking lot that wraps around 3 sides of the building. It was occupied. Maybe half the rooms had cars in front of them, but the office was still staffed by a teenager who gave us a key to a ground-floor room without commentary, charged us $40, and went back to a phone he was using to try to get a cell signal. Room 11. 2 queen beds and a fold-out couch, and a bathroom, and a television that I turned on once and then turned off. The news channels were showing maps of the city with an overlay that said, chemical hazard zone and shelter in place, in effect, and interviews with people who'd left before the routes closed, who were saying confused things about attacks and hospitals and checkpoints. Nobody on any channel had said the word that described what was actually happening. Kelsey sat on one of the beds and ate one of the sandwiches from the maintenance yard and said nothing for a long time. Claire had taken a shower and was lying on the other bed staring at the ceiling. The form, she said, the Proto 7 thing. Yeah, I said. I was sitting at the small table with my laptop open and the form in front of me, trying to find the OCA designation in any public government database. The motel had Wi-Fi, sluggish but working. I can't find OCA in anything public. It's not in the standard emergency management taxonomy. It's not in the Federal Emergency Response Framework documentation. It's not. It's not anywhere I can find with public search. Could it be a state-level designation? State Emergency Management is DOT's parent agency in some respects. I know their taxonomy pretty well. It's not there either. Kelsey finished her sandwich. Declan, she said. The form had a federal seal. Yeah, and the closure notices were filed before the incidents, 6 to 8 hours before, and they had an automated emergency management protocol ready to run. Yes, she was quiet for a moment. They had a plan, she said. They had a plan that already existed, and something triggered the plan. Something that they may have anticipated was going to happen, I said. Or something they knew was going to happen, Claire said from the other bed. We sat with that. I slept for about 4 hours, I think, and woke up at what felt like very early morning. The room was dark. Kelsey was asleep in the other bed, her breathing slow and even. Claire was still on the fold-out. I sat in the dark and thought. The thing I kept coming back to was the waterfront, the clustering of the early incident reports around the hospital district, and the old industrial waterfront area, the chemical spill cover story. The waterfront isn't just a geographic area. It has a history. The old industrial waterfront in our city has been a brownfield remediation zone for 20 years, a series of former chemical and manufacturing sites that the EPA and the city have been working through in sequence. There have been at least 3 major remediation projects in that zone in the last decade. One of them, about 4 years ago, involved a federal Superfund site on the northernmost pier, an old paint manufacturing plant that had contaminated the groundwater with a particularly complex mix of industrial solvents. I remember seeing this in the news because it was a big cleanup project, federally funded, and there had been some public comment meetings about it that my office had been involved in peripherally from a traffic management perspective. The remediation project had gone quiet. I couldn't remember seeing updates about it in the news in the last couple of years. Projects go quiet sometimes when they're in long-term monitoring phases, or when they stop being publicly discussed for other reasons. I opened my laptop and went looking. The EPA public database had information on the site up to about 2.5 years ago. Then the public updates stopped. The site was still listed as active in the database, still assigned to a remediation contractor, but no status updates for 28 months. The contractor was a company called Consolidated Environmental Solutions. I looked them up. Normal-looking environmental remediation company. Founded 12 years ago. Clients included several federal agencies and a string of state governments. One of their clients, listed on their website under federal partners, was the OCA. I sat up straight. OCA. I searched for it again, this time specifically in conjunction with Consolidated Environmental. Found a cached page from a government contractor database, the kind of database that posts procurement records, that listed OCA as the Office of Containment Assessment, listed under the Department of Health and Human Services, but with a cross-designation to the Department of Homeland Security. The Office of Containment Assessment. I read the name again and again. Office of Containment Assessment. Not disease containment. Not emergency response. Containment assessment. The assessment of containment situations, which implies, necessarily, that containment situations were something that had been anticipated as an ongoing possibility, something that needed a permanent office dedicated to evaluating them. I read everything I could find about the OCA in the next 2 hours. It wasn't much. The cached procurement page, a mention in a DHS organizational chart from 3 years ago that listed OCA as a subordinate office under a division called BSARP, Biological Safety and Resilience Planning. A brief reference in a congressional appropriations document from 5 years ago, allocating funding to BSARP activities including assessment protocols for urban biological containment scenarios. Urban biological containment scenarios. Pre-allocated funding. A protocol with a number, Proto 7. A contractor who had been working on a federal remediation site 4 blocks from where the first cases appeared. I was not making a claim. I was looking at data. I write that because I think it's important to be precise about the difference between evidence and conclusion. I had evidence of proximity and of prior planning. I did not have a causal chain. but proximity and prior planning were enough to mean I needed to keep pulling on this thread. I woke Kelsey at 6 a.m. She sat up immediately, which she always does. She wakes the same way she works, fully and at once. I found the OCA, I said, and showed her my laptop. She read through what I'd found. Claire, now awake in the foldout, came over and read over Kelsey's shoulder. BSRP, Claire said. Biological Safety and Resilience Planning. Under DHS, I said. Urban Biological Containment Scenarios. She said it slowly. They've been planning for this. Planning for something like this, I said. I don't know if they planned for this specific event or for a general class of events. The contractor, Kelsey said. She was still looking at the screen. The one working on the waterfront site. OCA is their client. Yes. For 28 months, no public updates on that site. Yes. She set the laptop down on the bed and put her hands flat on her thighs, which is what she does when she's organizing her thoughts. Declan, the patients who came in Monday night, the first patients. Do you know where they came from, geographically? I thought about my spatial clustering analysis. The ring of early incidents around the hospital district and waterfront. The waterfront area, I said. Based on the incident clustering I mapped on day 1. Monday afternoon, I had a shift that overlapped with the influx, she said, before the guard came in. I had time to talk to 2 of the first patients who were still conscious and responsive. Both of them said they'd come from the old pier area. One of them said he'd been working near there, maintenance worker for the Port Authority. The other said she'd been jogging along the waterfront path that runs along the pier district. In the afternoon, I said. Yes. And the closure notices were filed that morning. Yes, she said. We looked at each other. Something happened at that site, I said. Monday morning. And they knew it was going to spread, and they activated Proto 7, and they closed the highways. All before anyone was symptomatic enough to be in the ER, Kelsey said. Which means they knew the timeline, Claire said. They knew how fast it spreads. Or they'd modeled it, I said. Urban biological containment scenarios require modeling the spread rate. If they had a spread model for whatever this is, I stopped. They modeled it, Kelsey said, because they already knew what it was. Part 4. The maintenance routes, and what they connected. I'm going to jump forward here because the next several days were survival without major new information, and I've already described the basic shape of survival. Food, water, movement, avoiding infected. And I don't want to document it in detail that doesn't serve the larger account, but I'll describe the shape of those days because the shape matters. We stayed at the motel for 2 days. Then the owner, a man I only spoke to briefly, 50s, Turkish immigrant named Zeke, who I liked immediately, came to our room on the second afternoon to say, politely but very directly, that people with weapons had arrived and were taking rooms and demanding supply access, and he was going to close the motel and leave with his family. He offered us food from the motel's break room supply closet. We took as much as we could carry. We loaded the car. 6 people total now. Us 3, Zeke and his wife, and their teenage son, who squeezed into the back seat and the cargo area with the bags. I drove them north another 30 miles to a family farm that Zeke knew, a property owned by someone his wife had grown up with. He navigated from memory, which I respected. We dropped them there and continued on. Claire, it turned out, had grown up in a small town about 60 miles north of the city. She had a house there, or rather, her mother did. Her mother, she told us during the drive, had died 2 years ago, and Claire had been holding on to the property, paying the taxes, not quite ready to sell it. A white clapboard house on a 2-acre plot outside a town of about 3,000 people, with a vegetable garden that had been allowed to go half wild since Claire's mother stopped being able to tend it. We went there. The house was intact. The town was quiet, not unpopulated. People were still there, going about reduced versions of their routines, watching each other and the news and the sky with a particular alertness. The town had set up what I can only describe as informal checkpoints on the 3 roads entering from the south. Not military, not police, just people in pickup trucks who wanted to know who was arriving and why. We explained ourselves honestly and were, after some deliberation, allowed through. The first week at Claire's mother's house was about establishing stability. Food: the vegetable garden had beans, tomatoes, some late-season squash, herbs. The root cellar had preserved goods: an old jar of applesauce, dried lentils in a sealed container, a rack of wine that we drank 2 bottles of over the first 3 nights. The house's well pump ran on electricity, which we had intermittently because the town's grid was still partially functioning on a reduced rotation. In the evenings, I worked on my laptop and in the small notebook I'd started keeping when I realized I needed a physical record that didn't depend on battery life. I was trying to build a complete picture. What I assembled over those days, from everything I'd collected and researched: the waterfront remediation site, the old paint manufacturing pier, had been reclassified from a standard EPA Superfund cleanup to a BSRIP active project at some point between 2.5 and 3 years ago. This reclassification was not in any public record I could find, but it was implied by the discontinuation of public updates and the appearance of OCA as a listed client for Consolidated Environmental Solutions during that period. Proto 7 was a specific urban biocontainment protocol that had been developed by BSRIP and assigned to at least 12 major metropolitan areas across the country, based on a procurement document I found that referenced Proto 7 urban deployment packages for a list of cities that included ours. It was not a response protocol for an outbreak that had already occurred. The language in the procurement document used the phrase pre-deployment readiness, meaning the protocol resources were positioned in advance, ready to be activated. The OCA's function, as best I could reconstruct it from the fragments of public documentation available, was to assess whether a biological containment situation had occurred or was occurring, and to coordinate the federal response. They didn't respond to outbreaks. They determined whether something needed to be contained and then activated the containment. The distinction is important because containment agencies respond to things that have already happened. Containment assessment agencies monitor for things that might happen and then make the call on when and how to respond. The highway closures were in the Proto 7 deployment package. I found this in a Federal Emergency Management supplemental document that referenced transportation network control as a Tier 1 Proto action. The first thing you do when a Proto is activated: seal the major egress routes. Keep the affected population in the assessment zone. The automated emergency management system that had overridden my access and pushed its own messages, that was the Proto 7 package, integrating with city and state traffic systems. Every major metro area with a Proto 7 package would have had this integration built in. Someone in my organization or above it had implemented the technical connection between the Proto 7 system and the DOT traffic management infrastructure. They'd done this quietly, as part of what I can only assume was a classified infrastructure project that traffic systems engineers like me were never told about. I had been maintaining a system that was also serving as the trigger mechanism for a containment protocol, and I had not known that. On day 12, I found out that Kelsey was not being held because she was infected. I found this out because Kelsey told me. She'd been holding something back. I could tell in the way she was quieter than usual, and Kelsey is not a quiet person normally. And on day 12, she sat me down at the kitchen table while Claire was outside working in the garden, and she put her hands on the table and said she needed to tell me something. She had treated a patient on Monday, before the guard arrived. The first patient from the waterfront, the Port Authority maintenance worker. He'd been confused, but intermittently coherent. In one of his coherent windows, he'd told her what he'd been doing at the pier site that day. He'd been contracted to clear a section of the pier's lower level for inspectors coming the following week. In the process, he'd found a door, a heavy metal door in the lower pier structure that wasn't on any maintenance map he'd been given. The door was sealed with a mechanical lock that wasn't standard Port Authority hardware. He'd noted it and reported it to his supervisor, and then gone home for the day and started feeling strange that evening. He'd drawn her a rough map of where the door was before he lost coherence completely. Kelsey had the map. She'd been carrying it in her scrubs, and when she'd packed her backpack in the basement, she'd put it in there. She had not mentioned it to the guard when they'd arrived because the man had made her promise, in those last coherent minutes, not to tell the military people. She didn't know why he'd said that specifically. She'd kept the promise because she was a nurse, and patient trust was something she held seriously, and because something about the way he'd said it had convinced her it mattered. She put the map on the table. It was a simple drawing, the pier structure from above, rough and approximate, with what appeared to be an access staircase leading down to a sublevel, and the door marked with an X and a notation that said, "Not on maps. Welded seal was broken. Recently." "He said the weld was broken from the inside," Kelsey said. I looked at the drawing. "Recently," I said. He said it looked recent. The metal was bright where the weld broke, not corroded. Someone inside that sealed room had opened it, or something had opened it. "Kelsey," I said. "I know," she said. "Whatever is in that room. I know." She looked at the map. "I know what you're going to say. Whatever is in that room is connected to all of this. The remediation project, the OCA, the Proto-7 activation. And it's still there," she said. "Or the door is still open." I sat back in my chair. "I'm not saying we should go back," she said quickly. I'm saying this is what you've been building toward. In everything you've researched. This is the thing underneath everything else." "Yes," I said. She looked at me. "I know you're going to go back," she said. "The city might be clearing," I said. "There are reports." I'd been monitoring the emergency radio and checking the intermittent internet, and there were reports that military response teams were conducting clearing operations in sections of the city. Systematic, working through districts. "If the city's being cleared," Kelsey said, "then whatever was in that room is going to be found, or destroyed, or classified. Or there's already a team at the pier," I said. "OCA or BSRIP or whoever. And whatever evidence exists down there is going to disappear." We were quiet. "The maintenance road," she said. "The one under the interchange. Could you get back into the city that way?" "The service entrance I used was on the east side. The pier is on the waterfront, which is southwest. There's no single tunnel that connects them," I thought. "But there are maintenance and utility access routes that run along the waterfront independently of the highway system. DOT has equipment along the elevated waterfront connector road. The maintenance road for that section runs along the lower pier structure." "Along the lower pier structure," she said. "Yes. Where the door is. Where the door might be. The sketch is rough. I'd need to correlate it with the actual maintenance route maps." She pushed back from the table and went to the kitchen window and looked out at Claire, who was pulling weeds from what had once been a row of carrots. Then she came back to the table. "If you go," she said, "you're not going alone." I started to say something and she talked over me. "You are not going back into a collapsing city by yourself. That is not negotiable, and I don't want to hear about it." She was right, and I knew she was right, and I also knew that taking her back into something I couldn't fully assess was wrong, and that knowing this wasn't going to change what she'd just said. "Claire needs to stay here," I said. "The town trusts her. She knows people. She has medical training." "I already thought about that," Kelsey said. "Claire stays. We go." I looked at her. She had our mother's eyes and our mother's stubbornness, and the particular competence that comes from years of work in places that are regularly difficult and sometimes actively frightening. "Okay," I said. Part 5. Going back. We left on day 14, early morning, before full light. Claire gave us everything she could spare. A bag of food, 2 more bottles of water, a pair of work gloves from the garage, a detailed road map of the city waterfront district that she found in a drawer of her mother's house, along with a stack of old utility bills and a Reader's Digest from 2009. She stood on the porch as we packed the car, and she looked like she was trying very hard to find a way to tell us not to go. And instead she said, "Come back." "Obviously," Kelsey said. We drove south. The highway north of the city was moving in both directions, more people still leaving than returning, but military vehicles and what appeared to be contractor vehicles were moving south. We passed 2 convoys of trucks that had no markings I could identify, just white vehicles with paper plates, which is a detail I noticed and wrote down because it was strange. The city limit checkpoint was now staffed by National Guard rather than local police. They were stopping southbound vehicles and checking them. For what, I didn't know. We slowed. A soldier came to my window. I showed him my DOT badge before he asked. "Traffic Systems Assessment," I said. "We've had a request from the district director to evaluate sensor damage in the eastern corridor." He looked at the badge. "You're going in voluntarily?" "It's my job," I said. He studied me for a moment. Then, "Waterfront area and the hospital district are still under restricted access. Red zone. You need to stay east of the freight rail corridor. You'll see the barriers." "Understood," I said. "Thank you." We drove through. "Traffic Systems Assessment," Kelsey said. "It's technically accurate," I said. "I am assessing the current state of the traffic systems." Uh-huh. The city had changed again in the 2 weeks I'd been gone. The surface streets were mostly clear of normal vehicle traffic, some abandoned vehicles still in place, but the general chaos of day 2 had settled into a different, quieter kind of wrong. We passed through 3 neighborhoods where everything looked normal except for the absence of people and the presence, at regular intervals, of military vehicles or guard personnel on foot. We also passed through one neighborhood where the difference was something else entirely: broken glass. A car that had burned and wasn't still burning, scorch marks on 2 building facades. This wasn't a guard response. This was something that had happened here, on the ground, during the days between. I drove carefully. I watched the street. "There," Kelsey said. "An infected. On the sidewalk ahead and to the right, moving along the building face the way they do. No apparent purpose, just drifting." It hadn't reacted to our car. I drove past at reduced speed without braking hard and kept going. "They're slower than I expected," Kelsey said, watching in the passenger mirror. "I've been tracking the ones outside the maintenance shed," I said. "They have periods of more and less activity. There seems to be a temperature correlation. They move less in the cold. It's been colder the last few days. That may be why this area looks calmer." Temperature-dependent activity. "Observation, not confirmed," I said, "but consistent across what I've seen. The maintenance road under the waterfront connector was accessible from a service entrance on the industrial street that ran parallel to the pier district. This section of the city was deep in the red zone the guard had defined. The waterfront itself was clearly the epicenter of the restriction. We were going the wrong direction from what the soldier had told me. I was aware of this and had already made peace with it. The service entrance for this section of the maintenance road was older than the ones I'd used before. The card reader was the previous generation, the system that DOT had used before the upgrade 3 years ago. My keycard was issued after the upgrade and was for the new system. I sat in front of the card reader and thought about this. "Problem?" Kelsey said. "My card is wrong generation," I said. "How do you open it otherwise?" "There's usually an override code," I said. "For maintenance crews who lose their cards." I thought back. Our department used a rotation of numeric codes. The last one I knew was 77412, but that was for the updated system. The older generation would have used a different code. "Do you know the older code?" "No." She looked at the keypad. "Try the default," she said. I looked at her. "What?" "Older systems," she said. "Before they figured out that people don't change defaults. Try 1234 or 0000. I tried 1234. Green light. The barrier opened. "That's a serious security vulnerability," I said. "I know," Kelsey said. We went in. The waterfront maintenance road was different from the one under the interchange. Older, clearly. The concrete was a different color. The drainage channeling was an older design. The work light fixtures were vintage fluorescent, rather than the LED units in the newer sections. Some of the lights still worked, most didn't. I had a flashlight in each hand, and Kelsey held a third, and we moved through the sections of darkness between working lights with the flashlights cutting the gaps. The road ran along the underside of the elevated waterfront connector road, and then, at a certain point, went through a narrow section where the road passed under the pier structure itself. The pier district extended over the water, and the maintenance road ran beneath the elevated deck of the pier for about 300 meters before emerging on the far side. That 300-meter section was where I needed to be. I had the rough sketch that the patient had drawn for Kelsey. I'd correlated it as best I could with the maintenance road layout from memory. The door should be in the section where the pier's lower structural level met the maintenance road, approximately where the pier's foundation piles came down to the water line, and there was a transition between the road surface and what I estimated was a storage or access level built into the pier's original construction. We went through the underpass section. The road here was narrower, the ceiling lower, the sound of water very close. We were essentially under the pier, above the actual water line by maybe 8 feet, and through the structural gaps in the concrete above, I could hear the water moving. Also, I could smell something. Not the water smell, something chemical, faint but present, the particular sharpness of industrial compounds that have been in an enclosed space. Kelsey smelled it too. "You have it?" she said. "Yes." We kept moving. 2/3 of the way through the underpass section, on the right side, partially behind a cluster of structural support columns, a door. Heavy steel, painted red, in the way that restricted access doors are often painted. No window. No handle on the outside, just a flush pull ring on a spring mount, the kind used for doors that are meant to be operated from inside. There was a weld seam around the frame that was clearly original, and at the bottom of the weld, at the hinge side, a section of approximately 8 inches where the weld had been broken. The broken weld was still bright, uncorroded, as the patient had described. The door was slightly ajar. The gap at the bottom of the frame was maybe an inch. The chemical smell was coming from behind it. I put my hand flat on the door and pushed gently. The hinges were heavy and slow, but they moved. The door opened inward. I pulled it wider. A staircase, going down, below the level of the pier road, into the pier's foundation structure. The steps were concrete, old, poured when the pier was originally built. There were LED strip lights along the right side of the staircase, new, recently installed, currently on. Someone had put lights in here, recently. I looked at Kelsey. "Together," she said. We went down. The space below the pier was large. I hadn't expected that. From the outside, the pier reads as a working commercial structure. Storage buildings, vehicle access, freight handling infrastructure. The public-facing infrastructure is all above, but the foundations of piers of this era often contain large vaulted spaces, originally built as equipment storage and ballast management areas before modern port handling changed how everything worked. I'd never been in this pier's foundation level, and I'd had no reason to know what was there. What was there was a research facility. I'm going to write that plainly. A research facility. Not a large one. The space was maybe 60 feet by 40 feet, irregular, shaped by the pier's structural requirements, but equipped. Workbenches along 2 walls with equipment I partially recognized. Centrifuges, incubators, sealed storage units. A fume hood at the far end. A computer workstation, currently off but with a standby light indicating it was on backup power. 2 sealed refrigeration units the size of commercial chest freezers. An area in the back corner that appeared to be a containment room. A glass-walled enclosure with a pass-through chamber, the kind you see in biosafety level facilities. The containment room's inner door was open. The outer door, the airlock-style pass-through, was closed, but its seals appeared damaged. Not broken violently. The rubber gaskets on the door frame were cracked and deformed, the kind of damage that happens over a long period of thermal cycling. Old seals, never replaced. The chemical smell was stronger here, but still not overwhelming. I didn't know what it was. Kelsey was looking at the workbenches. I went to the computer workstation and tried the keyboard. The screen came on, sleep mode. No login required. The last session was still cached. I sat down. The screen showed a file management interface with a project folder open. The project name at the top of the interface was something I'd need to explain carefully. It said, Halo Remediation, Containment Assessment, OCA Project 11B. I took pictures of the screen with my phone. I went through the folder structure. The project files went back 8 years. The earliest ones were labeled Site Assessment, Halo Compound Recovery. The word halo appeared throughout. In one document I opened, a status report from approximately 4 years ago, it was defined in the first paragraph. Halo is the designation for the recovered compound, extracted from the site's pre-existing contamination. Initial assessment indicated viable biological activity, consistent with Project Containment Category 4 parameters. Viable biological activity in a contaminated site, extracted and stored here for 8 years. I kept reading. The compound, Halo compound, had been isolated from the groundwater contamination at the pier site and found to contain what the documents described as a novel pathogenic agent that had been present in the site's original contamination from the paint manufacturing era. The agent was not a known pathogen. It had properties that the scientists working on this project had spent years characterizing. The files included partial scientific characterizations that I could follow well enough to understand the shape of. The agent was not bacterial. It produced measurable neurological effects in exposed tissue samples, and it had what one document called anomalous persistence and transmissibility characteristics. Anomalous persistence and transmissibility. That phrase appears 14 times in the documents I read in that room. Someone had found something in this contaminated site, something that shouldn't have been there. They'd reported it up the chain, and instead of remediating it, as the public-facing remediation project implied, they'd moved it here, to this facility, to study it. For 8 years, Kelsey had found a document of her own on the workbench, printed, not on screen. A status report with a handwritten date in the margin from approximately 3 months ago. She held it out to me without saying anything. The status report said, Agent containment seals degraded. Assessment. Primary containment unit shows breach risk at current seal age. Recommendation. Immediate replacement or transfer of remaining compound to secure facility. 3 months ago, they'd known the seals were failing. The date on the handwritten note in the margin wasn't a date at all. It was an initial, RH, and a single word, approved. Approved for what? For the replacement or transfer, or for something else. The document didn't say. I thought about the entry the Port Authority maintenance worker had found. The welded shut door. The weld seal broken from the inside, recently. If the containment seals in this room failed, if the compound escaped its containment, and if the pathogen was airborne or water transmissible. Declan, Kelsey said. Her voice was different. I looked up. She was pointing at the containment room, at the far side of it, at the floor. There was a crack in the rear wall of the containment room, a long, irregular crack running from near the floor to about 3 feet up. And in the crack, the kind of discoloration that happens in old concrete that has been exposed to moisture for a long time. The pier's outer wall, the waterfront side. The compound had been stored in a room that shared a structural wall with the waterfront. A wall that had been there since the pier was built, that had been subject to decades of tidal pressure and salt exposure, that was now cracked. The water side, I said. Yes, Kelsey said. The compound hadn't leaked through the aging containment unit seals. Or not only that, the outer wall had cracked. The compound had been near that crack. The contaminated waterfront groundwater, the original contamination, mixed with whatever this compound was, had been seeping through that crack, getting into the water. For how long, I couldn't know without more information. Weeks, maybe longer. The maintenance worker had come in, found the broken welded door, come in, and then, after having been in this space, had walked back out into the city, had gone home, had started feeling strange that evening. Is this what started it? Kelsey said. Yes, I said. I think so. Did it leak through the crack, or both, maybe? The crack in the outer wall, and then whoever opened that outer door from inside. If there was someone down here, working, when the crack, I stopped. We don't know everything. We have enough to understand the shape of it. I copied as many files as I could to a thumb drive I found in the desk drawer. I photographed everything. I went through the filing area on the left side workbench and took paper documents that looked important. I was moving quickly and not systematically because I was afraid. Not of the infected, of someone coming here who was not us. The white trucks with paper plates, The convoys moving south. Someone was already coming to this facility. "We need to go," I said. We went. Getting back out was faster, because we were moving urgently, and fear does something to pace. Through the underpass section, through the maintenance road, back to the service entrance, back to the car. Kelsey had the printed documents under her jacket. I had the thumb drive in my front pocket, and my phone with the photographs in my other pocket. We drove east, away from the waterfront, away from the red zone. We were a mile away from the service entrance when I heard, very faintly, through the closed car windows, the sound of multiple helicopters. I looked up through the windshield, 2 of them, coming from the south, low and fast, moving toward the waterfront. I drove east. "Did you get what you need?" Kelsey said. "I got what's there," I said. "Whether it's what I need, I don't know yet." Current status update. I'm in the maintenance shed. Kelsey is in the town with Claire, 40 miles north. We decided this was safer. I need to be close enough to the city to continue monitoring. And having Kelsey in the town with someone who knows the community and has medical training is better than having her sitting in a concrete shed with me. I don't love being here alone. I've always been better at alone than most people. But that was before a 3-week period of existential disruption reframed what alone means. What I have now. The documents from the peer facility. I've spent the last 4 days reading them as carefully as I can, and I'm going to write up a full assessment. The most important things, briefly. The Halo compound has properties that match, in the document's own language, what I've seen in the infected. The neurological disruption, the aggression, the loss of higher cognitive function, the anomalous persistence. The documents confirm the pathogen degrades prefrontal cortical activity first and fastest, which explains why the infected don't problem solve, don't plan, can't perform sequential tasks. They move towards stimuli. They bite. They don't open doors. They don't think. The transmissibility is through direct fluid contact, saliva, primarily, which is consistent with the bite mechanism being the infection vector. Not airborne, except in close proximity to a concentrated source, which is presumably what happened to the first people who entered this facility, or were near the outer wall crack when groundwater containing the compound was moving through. The OCA knew about the compound for 8 years. They classified it, studied it, and maintained a classified facility in the middle of a city without informing any city authority about its existence or risk. When the outer wall cracked and the compound began spreading, they activated Proto 7, which was their containment response. The containment response involved closing the highways, not to protect the public, but to control the movement of potentially exposed individuals, while OCA assessed the scale of the spread. They closed the highways to keep us in, to keep us available for assessment, not to protect us from the spread, but to contain the exposed population within the zone they could monitor. The distinction matters. I've been trying to figure out who RH is, the initials on the margin note that approved whatever was approved 3 months ago. I've been going through the file structure looking for anything that might connect an individual with those initials to the project. Yesterday I found it. A personnel file, not fully filled out, in a subfolder called Oversight. The name on the file, Robert Holloway, Project Director, OCA Project 11B. Oversight Authority for Halo Remediation. Federal Employee Number. Contact details. No photograph. Robert Holloway, RH. The person who approved the status report that flagged failing containment seals 3 months ago. The person with oversight authority for the project. I have his employee number. I have the OCA project designation. I have 8 years of documentation that has never been made public, that proves a federal office knew about a pathogenic agent in an urban area and concealed it, that proves the highway closures were not a protective response, but a containment operation for the agency's own purposes. The question, the one I've been sitting with for 3 days, alone in this shed with the gravel sound of infected drifting past outside, is what to do with it. I can try to get it to someone who can do something. Media, specific investigative journalists. Someone with the reach to make this public before it disappears the way classified things disappear. I have enough for a substantial story. The documents are authentic. The timeline is verifiable. The connection between the pier facility and the outbreak origin is documentable. Or I can keep running, keep moving north. Find Kelsey, find Claire, find a community of some kind, and try to survive the ongoing situation rather than expose the people who caused it. Here's the thing. The ongoing situation is not going to resolve by itself. The infected are still in the city. The Proto-7 containment protocol is apparently still active. The military presence, the guard, the white trucks with no plates, they're still operating. Whatever OCA is doing down at that pier facility right now, they're doing it without public oversight or accountability. And somewhere in a red-zoned hospital district, in isolation, staff who were guided back in are still being held. Some of them, maybe, for the same reason the guard held Kelsey, not because they were infected, but because they'd seen things, because they knew things. I'm a traffic systems engineer. I know how to read a network. I know how to identify where the system is failing and why. I know how to find the paths that bypass the blockages. This is a systems failure, a large one, caused by specific decisions made by specific people, operating under a specific mandate that they believed exempted them from the consequences of those decisions. I'm going to do something about that. I don't know exactly what yet. The plan is still forming, but the plan is forming, which is different from 2 weeks ago, when there was no plan, only survival. Outside right now, it's quiet. The infected on the gravel road have moved off somewhere. The generator is running low and I'm going to shut it off in a few minutes and go back to darkness, and the ventilation slot, and the cool air that smells like concrete, and outside. Tomorrow, I'm driving north to the town. I need to show Kelsey and Claire what I found. And then I need to figure out how to get the information in these documents to someone who can use it, without the people who want it buried finding out I have it first. One more thing. Something I've been putting off writing because I'm not sure I know how to write it. A few days ago, just before dark, I was sitting near the ventilation slot, watching the access road through the narrow gap, habit at this point, and I saw one of the infected clearly, for the first time since I'd been in the shed. A man. Middle-aged, I'd guess, wearing what had been business casual clothing. Gray slacks, a blue button-down that was torn on one side. He was walking slowly along the access road the way they walk, that purposeless drift. He stopped about 20 feet from the shed and stood still for a long moment. Then he tilted his head, not toward the shed, not in any particular direction, just a tilt, like he'd heard something, or like the thought of hearing something had occurred to whatever was still operating in there. He stood there for maybe 2 minutes. Then he started walking again, down the access road, away from the shed, and disappeared around the bend, where the road curves toward the old equipment yard. I sat there and thought about the Halo documents that said the pathogen degrades prefrontal cortical activity first and fastest. Degrades, not destroys, not immediately, a process. I thought about how long he'd been infected. I thought about what gradual means in a brain. I thought about a lot of things in those 2 minutes, and I'm going to stop thinking about most of them now, because I have other things to do. Part 6. The Decision. I'm writing this section from the town, Claire's mother's house, 11 days after the last update. I lost access to my notebook for 4 of those days because of what happened, and I'm going to catch up as quickly as I can. I got back to the town and showed Kelsey and Claire everything. The photographs, the documents, the timeline. We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours going through it. Claire's medical background meant she could read the compound characterization documents with more depth than I could, and she confirmed that the description in those documents matched the clinical presentation of the infected she'd treated, the neurological pathway, the transmission mechanism, the timeline. The SEALs, she said. When did the status report say they were flagged? 3 months ago. And the outbreak started 3 weeks ago. Yes. She thought about that. The SEALs are listed in the status report as at breach risk. Not breached, at risk. But the crack in the outer wall wasn't in the status report, I said. No. Which means either they found the crack after the report and didn't update it, or they didn't know about it when the report was written. Or they found it and considered it separately from the containment unit SEAL issue, Kelsey said. Either way, Claire said. 2 failure points, and they approved continued operation. Approved continued operation. RH approved continued operation. I'd been trying to learn more about Robert Holloway, the project director. What I'd found was almost nothing, which in itself was information. A person with his level of apparent authority in a federal agency, running a classified project for 8 years in a major American city, leaving almost no public trace. No academic papers, no professional profiles, no news mentions. The government employee database entry I'd found was minimal and recently updated, based on the metadata I could see. He existed precisely enough to authorize things, no more. On day 3 of being back in the town, 2 things happened on the same day. First, the town's informal checkpoint stopped a vehicle coming from the south that didn't turn around when asked. A white van, no plate markings. 2 men in it who said they were from a state emergency relief agency and were conducting survivor census operations. The checkpoint people, 3 local men who'd been rotating shifts for 2 weeks, asked them for identification. The men produced ID cards that the checkpoint people described to me afterward as looking almost right but not quite. Different paper stock than a normal federal ID, they thought. Or maybe they just looked too new. The men were told the town wasn't accepting outside agencies right now and were asked to leave. They left. They drove south. Second, I received a message through an anonymous email account to the address I'd started using after leaving my work email behind. The message had no greeting, no signature. It said, "You have material from Project 11B. The people looking for it know you were in the facility. You have approximately 72 hours before they confirm your location. If you want to make it matter, contact this address, and I will help you." Then a different email address. I sat in Claire's kitchen and read this message 4 times. Then I showed it to Kelsey and Claire. "Anonymous tip," Kelsey said. "Could be anything. Could be a way to find us." "Could be someone inside who wants out," Claire said. "Could be OCA trying to recover the documents," I said. "Identify me, identify what I have, recover it." We were all thinking the same thing, which was 72 hours. "Do you have a way to get the documents out?" Claire said, without responding to this. "I've been working on that," I said. "There's a journalist, investigative, health and environment beat, broke a story about a federal agency misclassifying chemical hazard data 2 years ago. She has existing knowledge of federal environmental cover-up dynamics. I've found her encrypted contact." "Have you contacted her?" "Not yet." "Why not?" Kelsey said. "Because I was scared. Because once I sent those documents to someone outside my direct control, the shape of what happened next was no longer in my hands. Because I'd been operating for 3 weeks as if this were a systems problem with a technical solution, and sending documents to a journalist was not a technical solution. It was a human one, with all the unpredictability that implies. "I'm scared," I said. Neither of them said anything about that, which I appreciated. "The white van," Kelsey said after a moment. "If they're already this close, 72 hours becomes less than that." "Yes." I'm going to be honest about what happened next, because honesty is the only thing, and because I promised myself at the beginning of this log that I was going to write it all down, the whole thing, not just the parts that make me look competent. I panicked, not visibly. I don't panic visibly. I have a surface calm that has consistently fooled people into thinking I'm handling things better than I am. But internally, I hit a wall of complete uncertainty that lasted about 4 hours, during which I sat in the back bedroom of Claire's mother's house, with my laptop open and the journalist's encrypted contact on the screen and the thumb drive in my hand, and did absolutely nothing. Kelsey came in after those 4 hours and sat on the floor next to the chair I was in and didn't say anything. And after a while I said, "I need a few more minutes." "I know," she said. "I'm going to do it." "I know," she said again. "I just need to think through the—" "Declan," she put her hand on my arm. "There's nothing more to think through. You've been thinking for 3 weeks. You have everything. Send it." So I sent it. I wrote a cover message that was the clearest, most factual thing I've ever written. 3 pages. The timeline, the documentation, the pier facility, the OCA project, the Proto-7 activation, the highway closures, the containment rationale. Every claim back to a specific document in the attached files. No interpretation, no editorial, just the data and its source. I attached everything, and I sent it. Then I sent it to a second journalist. Then to a senator's Environmental Oversight Committee contact email that I found in a public database. Then to the EPA Inspector General's tip line. Then, and this was Kelsey's idea, and it was the right idea, to a copy of myself, to 3 different email addresses, to cloud storage accounts I created in that moment and will never access from a device traceable to me, and to a copy that I encrypted and emailed to a lawyer Kelsey trusted, with instructions to hold it and release it if she didn't hear from us within 7 days. By the time I was done, it was past midnight. The house was quiet. Claire had gone to sleep. Kelsey was still on the floor next to my chair. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said. I closed the laptop. The anonymous email. I thought about it for another day and then responded. Not with my location, not with anything identifying. Just, I sent the documents. If you're real and you can help, you know what I know. Find me another way. 2 days later, a man knocked on Claire's front door. He was 50, or close to it. Medium height, brown coat, no visible identification of any kind. He said he'd gotten my message, and that he was the person who'd sent the anonymous email and that he wanted to talk. I looked at him through the screen door for a long moment. He said, "My name is Peter Callum. I was the lead scientist on OCA Project 11B from year 3 through year 6. I resigned. I've been living 20 miles from here for the past year. I've been watching this happen." I opened the door. Peter Callum sat at Claire's kitchen table and drank tea and told us things for the better part of 4 hours. Some of it confirmed what I already knew. The Halo compound, the pier facility, the OCA oversight, Holloway, the 8 years of classified study. Some of it was new. The Halo compound was originally found in the pier site's groundwater approximately 12 years ago, not 8. For the first 4 years, it was assessed by a standard EPA contractor as part of the normal remediation process. 2 of that contractor's scientists flagged the anomalous biological activity and reported it up the chain. Within 8 months, OCA had taken over the site under a federal authority that superseded the EPA remediation classification. The EPA contractor was told to stand down. Their scientists were required to sign non-disclosure agreements. Peter had joined the project in year 3, brought in as a neurobiological specialist to characterize the compound's effects. He'd spent 3 years working in that pier facility. He had clearance. He believed in the work, at first. The compound was genuinely novel, genuinely significant, and the science of understanding it was real science. He did not minimize that. What changed for him was a meeting, in year 6, where he was told that the project's direction was shifting from characterization to potential application assessment. "Application," Kelsey said. "The compound disrupts neurological function in a way that has specificity," Peter said. "It degrades complex cognitive processing while leaving basic motor and reactive function intact. From a purely scientific standpoint, that's an unusual neurological profile. From an applied standpoint," he looked at the table, "it has characteristics that certain agencies consider interesting." Kelsey and Claire were very still. "They were trying to weaponize it," I said. "No one used that word," he said. "The word used was characterize. The phrase used was dual-use potential assessment. I resigned within 3 months of that meeting." "And the NDA," I said. "And the NDA," he looked up. "Which is why I couldn't simply go public. But now that you've sent the documents," he spread his hands. "The NDA's confidentiality protections don't extend to criminal wrongdoing. And what happened here?" He paused. "What happened here was that they kept a pathogenic agent in an inadequate facility inside a major city for 12 years, failed to act when containment was flagged as compromised, and then responded to the resulting outbreak by sealing 1 million people inside the exposure zone while they figured out what they were going to do about it." "Did they know the outer wall had cracked?" I asked. I don't know when they discovered it, he said. I know the facility was last inspected by a qualified structural engineer, approximately 4 years ago. Whoever was running the project after me, whoever took my position, they were responsible for maintaining that inspection schedule. Holloway. Holloway was the project director, he said carefully. Whether the specific structural inspection was in his purview or was delegated to someone else, I don't know. Was there a person with specific responsibility for the facility's physical infrastructure? He thought. There was a facilities manager position. The person in that role when I left was a man named Dale Fry. I don't know if he remained in that position. Dale Fry. I wrote it down. What about the people still in the city? Kelsey said. The people who are still there. What's the current OCA plan? I don't know their current plan, Peter said. I've been following the public information and what I can piece together from my former colleagues. The Proto-7 protocol was designed for containment and assessment, not for remediation. They could clear the infected population with enough resources and enough time, but the compound is in the environment now, in the waterfront water, potentially in the groundwater, depending on how long the outer wall crack has been active. Clearing the infected doesn't remediate the source. Do they know this? I asked. They've known for 8 years how to characterize this compound, he said. Yes, they know. We sat with that for a while. What do you think happens now? Claire said. I think, Peter said, that the documents your friend sent to journalists and to the Inspector General's tip line are going to create pressure. And I think that people inside the OCA and BSRIP and the agencies above them are going to start trying to manage that pressure. Some of them are going to want to suppress it, which won't work now that the documents are distributed. Some of them are going to want to get ahead of it, which means cooperating with investigations before the investigations demand cooperation. He paused. And some of them are going to be very interested in where the documents came from. They already know, I said. The anonymous email. I know they already know about you, he said. I sent you that email as a warning, not as a reveal. If I'd found you, they were close behind. The white van. Yes. Are they still looking for us? I think, he said carefully, that as of approximately 24 hours after you sent those documents, the strategic calculus around recovering those documents changed significantly. Once the documents are in the hands of journalists and oversight bodies, recovering the originals from you becomes less useful and potentially more costly than managing the disclosure. You become less valuable as a target. Potentially, Kelsey said. I'm not an intelligence professional, Peter said. I'm a neurobiologist who used to work in a basement under a pier. I'm giving you my best reasoning. So are we, I said. That was 4 days ago. Here is where things stand now. On day 29, since the day I saw 3 sensors show 0 counts on I-78 westbound. The journalist I contacted first published an initial report 6 days ago. I've been following it on a borrowed laptop with a mobile data connection that's slow but functional. The story used the documents I sent and described the pier facility and the OCA project. It has been picked up by other outlets. There are now questions being asked in public, on the record, by people with the authority to ask them. The EPA administrator has issued a statement saying they were not informed of the OCA's reclassification of the pier site. The DHS spokesperson has said the department does not comment on active operational matters. 3 members of Congress have publicly requested a briefing from BSRP. Holloway hasn't appeared anywhere in public or given any statement. I don't know where he is. I don't know what he's doing. In the city, operations are ongoing. The public account says military and federal response teams are systematically clearing the infected population. The public account does not say anything about the waterfront facility or the compound. The public account says the outbreak was caused by a chemical contamination incident at an industrial site, which is true enough to be misleading. The infected in the city are still there. They're being dealt with systematically, which means they're being encountered and handled. I won't use more specific language because I don't want to dwell there. The people still inside the city, and there are people still inside, are being reached by response teams. Not all of them, not fast enough probably, but reached. Kelsey has been going to the community center in town 2 evenings a week to help with whatever medical support is needed there. She does not talk about what she saw at St. Catherine's, except once, to Claire, when she thought I was asleep and wasn't. I've been contacted by the Congressional Oversight staff requesting a formal interview about what I documented. Peter Callum is cooperating with a separate inquiry. We haven't been to the same room since his visit, but we've exchanged messages. I am not a hero. I want to be extremely clear about that. I am a traffic systems engineer who looked at a data anomaly on a Tuesday morning and couldn't let it go. That's not heroism. That's a professional habit that happened to be relevant. I made mistakes. I packed badly the first day. I believed the hazmat cover story for longer than the data supported. I delayed sending the documents because I was afraid. Every one of those mistakes had potential costs that I was lucky didn't materialize. There's one more thing to document, and then I think this log is at a point where it can rest for a while. 2 days ago, I drove back to the city. South, through the checkpoint, which is now much more formally structured, actual verification of credentials, a registration process, forms to fill out. I showed my DOT identification and the credentials I'd been given by the oversight staff as a cooperating witness, which opened more doors than I expected. I drove to the operations center, my building, the one I'd walked out of 26 days ago, with my laptop and a field kit and 3 protein bars. The building was intact, some broken windows on the second floor, from something I couldn't determine. The parking lot was half occupied by response vehicles. My keycard still worked. I went to my desk. The monitors were still running, still cycling through camera feeds. Some cameras offline, others showing streets in various states. Empty, partially cleared, a few with response teams visible in the distance. The sensor data stream was running, auto-populated by the system, logging vehicle counts and incident data to the database, the way it always had. My coffee mug from Doug was on the desk, the insulated one from last Christmas, still there. I sat in my chair. On the monitor in front of me, the camera covering the I-78 westbound showed the road empty still. That section was still restricted, but the camera upstream of it showed something I hadn't seen in nearly 4 weeks. Traffic. Moving traffic. Slow, halting, tentative, but moving. Vehicles on the road. People going somewhere. I watched it for a while. A prompt appeared on the screen. The system's automatic notification. Sensor data gap detected. Manual review recommended. The 3 sensors on I-78 westbound at mile marker 34. Still offline. Still showing no data. Still showing nothing. Because the road was closed and there was nothing to count. I opened the manual review interface. I looked at the sensor logs. The last recorded vehicle count before the gap was from 8:47 a.m. on that Tuesday morning, 27 days ago. I sat there and thought about what was before that count, and what has been after it, and the shape of the thing in between. Then I closed the interface. I picked up the insulated coffee mug. I was going to bring it back to the town, wash it, use it. I walked out. Final note for this log, written late at night, day 29, Claire's mother's kitchen table, the overhead light making a low hum that I've been hearing for 2 weeks and have decided I find comforting. The system didn't fail because it was complex or because it was vulnerable to outside interference. The system failed because the people with authority over it made decisions in the dark, without the input of anyone who had to live inside the system's consequences. I know how to find the paths in a traffic network that the official route maps don't show. Service tunnels, unfinished bypasses, maintenance access roads, the paths that exist because systems need maintenance access, because someone has to be able to reach every part of the network from the outside. The path into this was the timestamp on an emergency closure notice. That's the maintenance access point, the gap in the official map that the actual network can't entirely conceal. I found the gap. I went in. I'm still working on finding the way out the other side. Not for me, not just for me, but for the people who are still inside the city's closed sections, still waiting, still surviving, without knowing the full account of why they ended up there. They deserve to know why the highways closed before anyone said anything. They deserve to know why the exits were sealed before the official acknowledgement. They deserve the maintenance map. I'm going to give it to them. Kelsey is asleep upstairs. Claire is asleep in the back room. Peter Callum is 20 miles north, in a house I now know the address of. The overhead light is humming. My coffee is hot this time, because I kept making myself drink it. Tomorrow, I have a call with congressional oversight staff at 9 a.m. The call will involve documentation review, preliminary questions, and what they describe as initial coordination of my formal witness statement. I've already written most of my statement. It's in this log. The data is the statement. I'm going to get some sleep.